Working Cows Podcast, episode 361. This episode is brought to you by Understanding Ag.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag studios, and this episode is brought to you by Understanding Ag. We've been fortunate to feature a number of Understanding Ag's regenerative farming and ranching experts on the podcast over the years. In that time, Understanding Ag's reputation for helping producers understand and successfully and profitably apply money-saving, regenerative principles and practices has only grown. And there are two primary reasons for that growth. First, Understanding Ag's consultants are farmers and ranchers who've been there, done that on their own regenerative farms. And second, Understanding Ag's consultants aren't in the business to sell you costly inputs. They get no commissions and you get no pressure, just profit-building solutions for your operation. Learn more at understandingag.com and discover the hope in healthy soils. That's www.understandingag.com. Very excited to be joined today by Gabe Brown and Dr. Alan Williams of Understanding Ag, and we're going to do an update with them. We're going to talk to them about their view of the state of agriculture in 2024, how it stands, how is it progressing, what's changed, what's new, and what's the same. So we're going to talk to them about how they see that. And this is just a little bit about a year removed from one of the first bonus episodes that we did with Understanding Ag back in 2023 about the state of agriculture then. So kind of get an updated view on some of those things. So very excited for this conversation with Gabe and Alan. Gabe, Alan, thanks for joining me again today on the Working Cows Podcast. Welcome back. Gabe, Alan, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Clay.
Absolutely. A pleasure, as always.
So I always enjoy the opportunity to get a different perspective on the world of agriculture from you two, especially just the way that you're exposed to such a broad view of American agriculture, and then also the paradigm challenging way in which you think about it. So I guess I'd like to just kind of give you guys an opportunity to kind of share what's on your mind, what you're seeing as you travel the country, and kind of the state of an update on the state of American agriculture as you guys see it.
Oh boy, that's a pretty wide open question there, Clay. I guess first thing on my mind is what has been so prevalent this spring across many areas of the country, whether we're talking the Corn Belt, the Great Plains. I know Alan talked about it in the Mississippi Delta, but the amount of soil erosion, wind erosion that we're seeing this year is, quite frankly, it's very appalling. Alan, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Gabe. And we're seeing it fairly widespread in many, many different regions of the country. And here very recently, I've been traveling in different portions of the lower Mississippi Delta region, and I have witnessed, quite a few dust storms that are occurring. There's a lot of dirt blowing, and it's not because the Delta is dry. As a matter of fact, I'm also witnessing at the exact same time a lot of water erosion. So you can go through these fields. There's a lot of standing water, a lot of water erosion, a lot of soil in the ditches. And then at the same time, we are seeing dust blowing. Now, how does this happen? How does it happen that we are having water and wind erosion occur in the same week in the same area? And this is becoming more and more concerning. Even the National Weather Service last week posted video of massive dust storms in the Midwest, specifically in Kansas. And we're in the spring of the year. That, it really shouldn't be happening anytime, but much less at this time of year when many of the regions of the country, Gabe, that are experiencing these dust storms, this wind erosion, actually have adequate moisture, or they're even excessively wet.
Yeah, exactly, Alan. And, Clay and I up here in the Northern Plains, here we are. It's in April. Snow. We did not have an overabundance of snow this winter, but we've had some moisture. We certainly shouldn't be seeing it. Yet here, I'm in central North Dakota. This past weekend, we had sustained winds, 45 to 55 miles per hour for 2 days. The amount of soil that was moving was just appalling. And, we're in an area where it's predominantly 70+% no-till. As you move east in North Dakota and in South Dakota, you get into more tillage being used as a practice. The amount of soil moving there was horrendous. It was actually stopping the flow of traffic on the interstates. They had videos, I-29 in the Red River Valley, of complete brownout conditions due to the amount of soil. Clay, what did you see in South Dakota there?
Yeah, same thing. It blew me away that there was actually, this was last year, May of 2022, there was actually what is called a haboob, Haboob, that went through Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Now, Sioux Falls, South Dakota is a place of 20 to 30 inches of rainfall every year. And when I went and looked it up I think it was even at that time on the Wikipedia article, it said that haboobs are desert dust storms. And I'm like, we've created a desert dust storm in a place that is 20 to 30 inches of rain a year. That just, it mystifies me. It's crazy. It blows me away that we've gotten to that point where we've essentially desertified of a non-arid environment through agricultural practice. Is that a unfair assessment of what we're seeing?
Not at all. And take a look at the alarming rates of desertification we're seeing worldwide, all because of mismanagement.
Well, and to your point there, Clay, so the Mississippi Delta gets 45 to 50 inches of rain a year, and yet we're seeing these these windstorms blowing significant amounts of soil around.
And it signifies a broken water cycle, right? I mean, we've come to a point where we can't infiltrate water, so we've got it running off, and so then as it runs off, it becomes dry faster, and the wind is able to blow the topsoil off. Is that kind of how you guys understand that to be playing out?
It's exactly correct. My question is this: we are not even yet 100 years removed from the first Dust Bowl, right? The 1930s Dust Bowl. And yet here we are again. So what did we learn the first time around? Apparently not a lot.
Well, exactly. And it comes down to the fact that we're not farming and ranching in synchrony with nature. We are not applying the principles of soil health. I mean, if we would simply follow the practice of keeping armor on the soil surface, having a living root in the soil as long as possible throughout the year. I look at the number of fields that after harvest the previous year, they, of course, when you get into clay in my neck of the woods, most of the grain stubble is baled off or it's grazed off too short. Animals left on there too long. And what that does is that leaves more bare soil, more soil exposed. I think of how easily it'd be to get something green and growing on those fields in the fall of the year, whether in the form of a cover crop or one of the practices we often recommend to our clients is if you're in a dry environment, you questioning the use of time, fuel, dollars to seed a cover crop. Why not, when you harvest that cash crop, simply, if it's a small grain crop, why not simply open up the sieves just a little bit, let a small amount of grain pass out, spread it with the chaff spreader, and you've got at least a living plant there, a living root system to hold that soil in place. So there's a lot of things that can be done to prevent it. And quite frankly, I think there's just no excuse for anyone to allow their soils to blow or erode away like that.
Has it gotten better or worse in the time that you've really been paying attention to it, both of you? Do you think that it's gotten better or worse? Do we see traction moving in the right direction, or what is your assessment?
So overall, it has gotten worse. Okay. We have noticed since about 2011, 2012, an increasing frequency nationwide in these dust storms and soil blowing and in water erosion, losing soil to water erosion. Now, that being said, on the flip side, we are seeing more and more farmers and ranchers and growers that are examining regenerative agriculture and expressing an interest. So that has grown, but overall, we still have a majority of the farming sector in the U.S. that still has the mentality of, we're going to plow ditch to ditch, road to road, fence row to fence row, right up against the creek, the stream, whatever. We're going to plant every possible square foot of ground we can plant. And we're removing tree rows, removing windbreaks, removing everything. Because, the concept is we've got massive equipment now and we need massive fields to be able to run that much bigger equipment than we've ever had before. And all of these other things that can help to slow down and mitigate wind erosion and water runoff, we need to get rid of because they're just getting in our way. And that's really, over the last 2 to 3 decades, that mentality has been very pervasive.
And I think a part of that is, Ellen mentioned the years 2011, thereabouts. It was about then that we really started noticing a more narrowing of the crop diversity on these farms, especially. When we're in a perennial system with ranches, obviously you have a perennial living root in the soil. That's not going to lend itself to these erosion issues unless the overgrazing is that severe. But as we noticed a narrowing, I look back and I remember back in the early 90s, you didn't see much corn grown in my area for grain. There was some corn for silage, not much for grain. now you look around me, you'd think you were in the Corn Belt. It's corn and soybeans. I mean, that's what it is. And we consult up into the prairie provinces of Canada. You get into Ontario, Manitoba, the southern half of those or third of those provinces, a lot of corn and beans up there too. So we're seeing where people went from very diverse crop rotations down to crop rotations that are maybe only 2 or at most 3 crops. That doesn't lend itself very well. It's not conducive to good soil health. And I think these erosion issues are come about somewhat as a result of that. I also think as land prices have escalated significantly, especially over the past 5 years, and then input costs have continued to escalate significantly. All of these things cause farmers to rely more and more heavily on federal farm programs, on revenue insurance. That in and of itself lends itself to less diversity in the system. It also makes it a bit more difficult to take part in some of these regenerative practices, although I certainly don't want that to be used as an excuse. There's no excuse for the erosion we're seeing taking place.
Yeah, is it true that the most common crops in America are the most subsidized crops? I mean, is that a fair statement, or is there more to it than that?
That is absolutely true. Easily proven out. Yep. Corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton. I mean, without a doubt.
Also, the ones that have a very short growing season, there isn't a living root in the ground for very long. Those are sometimes preceded and followed by tillage. All of these crops rely heavily on tillage in some regimes to continue to be productive. And so, I mean, all of those things seem to be a major contributing factor to why this is happening. And, the fact that people aren't feeling the pain necessarily of the issue. And so it makes it really hard to change when things are going, at least when things are cash flowing from year to year for now.
That's exactly right. And we can talk about how, right now beef cattle prices are good. Grain, commodity type grain is slipping in price significantly. As a matter of fact, I just ran budgets here recently for a farm we're working with here in North Dakota. Not a single cash flow, not one cash grain crop, not a single one cash flowed without the government subsidies. And there was an article that was released last week from a prominent no-tiller in the Corn Belt who stated that they were facing significant loss in income this coming year, projections, due to corn prices where they were at. However, he went on to say he was still going to plant the same amount of corn. And I just laughed at that. I'm like, oh, so that'll change things? We're going to lose money, but let's make sure we lose money, right?
So what is it going to take to change it? I mean, I just think that the incentives aren't there. And in fact, there are probably a lot of incentives to not do it, to not make the change. Is it going to take another Dust Bowl? Is it going to take some kind of catastrophic collapse for this to change, or do you guys see a different future?
Well, certainly, first and foremost, it's going to take a change of mind. We always hear, the talk about let's change our practices. or let's create more incentive payments to change a practice. Move to more no-till, move to more cover crops, that type of thing. Well, yes, but without being informed, without being educated at how to do that effectively, efficiently, and profitably, it's not going to work. So you first have to change minds, Clay. That's really critical. And until our farmers change their minds, we're still going to have issues. And at this point in time, there is going to be a lot more financial stress. And because we're seeing more wind and water erosion, that's going to make them even more reliant on purchased inputs, which are increasingly more and more expensive. So if we want to avoid a farming industry collapse, we are going to have to start changing our minds and decide that as farmers and ranchers, we're ready for that education. We're ready to learn how to do this differently and better and more effectively and efficiently. That is the bottom line to all of this. It's the talk about let's change policy in the Farm Bill, let's go to DC and get massive changes made. That's not going to happen, or at least not anywhere in the near future. We've still got all the lobbying pressure and everything else that is occurring there. So rather, what we must do is this has to be a farmer by farmer effort. We've got to do it boots on the ground, grassroots.
Even if it does, even if there was massive policy change, I don't think that the policies that are in place now are incentivizing people towards, I don't think they're incentivizing more people towards a regenerative model. I think that the people who are taking those policy or those program payments in a lot of cases are people who were going to do that anyways. I don't think that there's very many people that have been pushed down a regenerative pathway because of a subsidy or because of a program payment. And so I wonder, we in agriculture talk a lot about, I'd rather have the stick. I'd rather have the carrot than the stick, but I wonder if there's a stick coming. And maybe the stick is coming from the market, and I think that's probably the one that would drive more change quicker than the stick from the government. But I wonder if there isn't a stick coming that's going to force some of these changes.
Yep. Clay, let's talk about that a bit. I'll start and pass it off to Alan. But you look at, historically speaking, and Alan mentioned less than 100 years removed from the first Dust Bowl. Now we honestly believe we're entering a second Dust Bowl. Look at the billions of dollars that has been spent by government agencies and others that dangle that carrot, offer incentives, and what is the long-term adoption rate from those incentives? And I don't care if we're talking, NRCS government program, Ducks Unlimited programs, Audubon, I go on and on. I don't mean to leave anyone out here. But long-term adoption success rate, somewhere between 8 and 12%. Why is it? That's not very good use of taxpayer dollars. And that's your and mine, every one of us out there who pays taxes, that's our dollars. Okay? That was used for that. What was missing? What was missing was education. Okay? There wasn't an education component. Farmers and ranchers cannot implement what they do not know. I've made this statement before and I'll hold to it. If we had 100 farmers in a room and I asked everyone to write down and explain to me how a soil aggregate is formed, I would be surprised if I got 3 right answers out of 100. And wouldn't you agree, Alan? Maybe 3. Okay. So yet that aggregate, we just talked about the importance of the aggregate for water infiltration, soil biology, nutrient cycling, the list goes on and on. How do we expect farmers to understand and keep and adopt those practices long term if the education didn't come along with it? You know, Understanding Ag, Alan and I and Ray and Dave formed Understanding Ag because we knew, and we named it that because we knew that it was a lack of understanding. So what's the adoption rate for regenerative practices with farmers and ranchers that we work with? Well over 90%.
Wow.
Okay. What's the difference? 90% versus 8 to 12%. The difference is simply education. Okay. Our consultants are very good at educating, and despite most farmers won't want to hear this term, but hand holding, going out on a farm field, in a pasture, driving in an infiltration ring, showing them the difference between their field and the fence line, showing them the difference between their pasture and underneath the fence line. Management, or as I like to call it, stewardship, is the key. We have to have stewardship and understanding in order to implement these practices and adopt them long term. Alan, anything to add to that?
Well, you're exactly right. And we just completed a workshop yesterday for orchard growers. And one of the things that we did in that workshop was putting the shovel in the ground to look at the reality of the soil in orchards. And these are growers that have been in the orchard business a lifetime, and even a bunch of them from multiple generations. And they have never looked at their own soil. And we asked them, how many of you have ever done this before? How many of you have dug in your own soil in your orchards to look at it? And they had not. This was brand new to them. And then we said, well, do you have consultants that you work with? And all of them were yes. We said, so how many of your consultants have stuck a shovel in the ground and showed you your soil or looked at it themselves? And again, none. So that is the reality. As Gabe said, you can't implement what you do not know. And way too many growers and farmers today do not understand at all soil biology. They understand somewhat soil chemistry, but they have a real lack of understanding of soil biology and how that functions and why it's so critically important and how it influences soil physical structure and function. And so that's why the education is the missing component today in, changing this equation.
Yeah. Alan, let me just spin off that for a moment to give the listeners an example of that. So I mentioned that I was working on some budgets for some cropland here on a farm in North Dakota, and went to, this is a new farm, our first year working with this farm, went to the agronomists that have been working with the landowner for the past 20 plus years to get their idea of inputs, what's needed, fertilization rates, etc. Okay. This is in an area where average corn production yields about 50 bushels an acre. Okay. Wheat yields about 25. Very marginal soils. Okay. They had down their recommendation for nitrogen for the corn was 200 pounds per acre of nitrogen for the corn. wheat 225 pounds. Now, think of that. Okay, you want to further degrade a soil, just add excess nitrogen, because biology will consume it, but that biology is going to go looking for carbon, and you will collapse those soils and make them tighter, less water infiltration. Plus, look at the cost there. I mean, there's no way that'll cash flow. Urea in that area is $600 a ton now. And I'm just laughing at this, but no idea as to the biology that's in that soil and how much the natural nutrient cycle could move forward. So it's this lack of understanding the biology in the system that Alan talked about.
Yeah, and understanding the wrong things, right? I would, I don't know. I've never spent a day in a conventional education, agricultural education classroom, but I wouldn't be surprised if people came out of a conventional agricultural education with an understanding of how to apply for and maintain a relationship with crop insurance and no understanding of how soils are aggregated, right? And an understanding of how to apply and figure out fertilizer ratios with no understanding of how soils are aggregated, right? I think we're educating in the wrong direction in most conventional sectors. And that's a guess. You guys are way more familiar with it than I am, but that's kind of my assessment of where it is.
Yeah, Clay, I think we should ask the past professor what he says.
So, yeah, that's correct, Clay. Having lived in that world, as a university professor in agriculture, that is exactly correct. We were not teaching the right things. We were not teaching adequately about soil biology and its role. And why? Well, there's a multiplicity of reasons, but one of them is, as a researcher and a professor, you cannot teach what you don't know, and you cannot research what you do not know. And those two things are also issues within our higher institutions of learning.
Alan hit on a number of important things there, Clay. One thing that I think is really lacking is the understanding that our farms, our ranches are really ecosystems. And nearly all of the research being done today, the vast majority of it, 99%, is very singularly focused. And perhaps, Alan, you should talk a little bit about compounding effects, both negative and positive, and how we as farmers, ranchers need to understand that every single thing we do has compounding or cascading effects.
Yeah, absolutely. So in our 3 rules of adaptive stewardship, one of those rules is the rule of compounding. And basically, in nature, in biology, and in life in general, there never are any singular effects. Everything that happens, every decision we make, every management application we make results in compounding, cascading effects. And these effects are never neutral. They're either positive or negative. So that means our day-to-day management and decision-making is crucial in determining whether we're creating positive compound and infiltrate a lot more water, retain that water, feed the microbes, fuel the microbes in the soil so that they can function mineral cycle and we can help dry conditions. But likewise, on the flip side, by mismanagement of our soil, where we're creating soil that is crusty, plated, compacted, very low aggregated, now we have negative compounding effects. We have lack of ability of water to infiltrate and be retained in the soil. We have far greater incidences of water and wind erosion, of nutrient loss. Our microbes in the soil are no longer functioning to be able to cycle nutrients and feed the plant. So it just both feed on themselves, whether it's compounding or negative compounding. It either keeps getting better and better or worse and worse. Again, no middle ground here. And just to give you an example of this, so in our workshop yesterday, as we were in an orchard, it was fairly conventionally managed. And so the tree rows where the fruit trees were had a wide area around the trees, band around the trees that was completely bare. And they're taught to keep it sprayed out with herbicide and to keep it bare. And then they had grassy strips in between the tree rows. Now, admittedly, these grassy strips were low diversity and they were keeping them mown too low. But with our group in the workshop, we did the shovel test in both the tree row, the bare tree row, and then out in the grassy strip. In the bare tree row, the soil was heavily crusted on top, no aggregation whatsoever, heavily plated and compacted. And as we asked our group of growers to examine it, they all admitted that. Yes, that is what we're seeing. Yes, you're right. So then we went out to the grass strip, again, just a mere few feet away, and did the shovel test again. And even though this wasn't a great grass strip, and it could have been far better, there was still some aggregation. There was significantly deeper rooting. The soil had far less plating and compaction. And so I asked the growers, where do you have more water cycling and nutrient cycling going on? And they all admitted, well, right here in the grass strip. And so then I said, well, where is your cash crop growing? Is this your cash crop, the grass? They said, well, of course not. And I said, well, where is your cash crop? And they had no choice but to point over to the bare tree row right beside us. Well, there's our cash crop. And I said, well, what did we just see in that soil? Is it functioning nearly as well as this soil? And again, they had no choice but to admit, well, no, it's not. So I said, well, why do we not want this over there beside your trees? And you could tell that was an epiphany for many of them. Again, they were taught to do it that way, and they had never thought about the lack of nutrient cycling and water cycling that was occurring there as a result of doing it that way.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Understanding Ag. We've been fortunate to feature some of the world's leading regenerative ag and adaptive grazing experts on our show. And many of those experts are farmer rancher instructors from the nonprofit Soil Health Academy. This year, you'll have several opportunities to experience and profit from attending one of their remarkable on-farm schools and workshops. Whether you're interested in learning more about diversifying corn and bean rotations to increase profitability, merging multiple species in marketing, grazing on the high plains and in northern environments, regenerative farming and ranching, or enhancing profits and production in your beef or dairy operation, the Soil Health Academy has a school for you. One of the best investments you can make is in yourself. So visit soilhealthacademy.org to learn more and register. Financial assistance scholarships are available. Yeah, and I think that, we've definitely laid the foundation, talked about some of the causes, some of the issues, some of why this is happening. But do you guys have some other examples of people who have been making some changes, cutting some costs, figuring out how to reduce the input costs and some of those things and seeing positive results?
Sure. Let me share one example with you, Clay. Young farm family here in the northern Great Plains. For first came to understanding ag, the winter of 2018, 2019. They were already no-tilling. This is a straight cash grain farmer, no livestock. Grows pretty diverse array of different cash crops. So was not just one or two different cash crops. They attended a soil health academy, really did a good job of becoming, as Shane New says, intentional, determining, okay, I need to adopt the principles of soil health. I need to be intentional in what I'm doing. So they, in 2019, did baseline testings, found out the biology in their soil, started to diversify the crop rotation even further, started doing strip trials, various fertilization rates, started backing off on the use of GMOs, the use of insecticides. Fast forward to just here after the 2023 crop. So 5 years, they have reduced their fertility on their cash crops from 40 to 60%, depending on the cash crop. They have reduced their herbicides from 50 to 70%. And they rarely do any in-crop spraying. When they do, it's simply spot spraying. They will not spray the entire field. Okay? No pre-harvest burn downs anymore. No glyphosate used post-emergent. Okay? 100% elimination of insecticides, 100% elimination of fungicides, which is pretty rare in the northern plains. Most people are spraying fungicides all the time. Past 2 years have been their two most profitable years. In fact, so much so that this winter, they went and paid cash for half a section of cropland. And this isn't just low-priced cropland either. So think of that in 5 years. Think of the money savings and the transition of the mind. We talked about this. Alan said how they have to transition the mind. And now so much so their next big step is marketing. They understand that they need to take marketing into their hands. So they're finding the markets for their crops. They're doing nutrient density testing of their crops. They're doing herbicide residual testing in their grains to determine if they can receive a higher premium for it. So I tell you what, it's just been a joy when you get to work with producers like that who are intentional and really determine, hey, I'm going to make a difference. I want to just say one thing on how intentional this producer is. So when they're harvesting grain, usually during harvest season, it's pedal to the metal all the time. He still was that way, but he had the air seeder hooked up with the cover crop seed in. So what can't you do right away in the morning? Combine. He was seeding cover crops the day after he harvested grain out of that field. So every time he finished harvesting in a field, he was seeding cover crops immediately the next day in there, even though he doesn't have livestock. Now, in saying that, he's actually gone to where he is contracting with a neighbor to graze some of his cover crops so he can get animals integrated onto the land. Great, great story. I mean, wonderful to see two children who really are excited about agriculture and no doubt will come back to the farm.
Yeah, that's a great story. I mean, there's so much there as far as the reduction, but then also the ability on the back end with the marketing to pay attention to, the residual of the herbicides and all that, testing that and sending it off and figuring out how to market those things differently to really take advantage of it, because it's not just going into a commodity market at that point, and you're able to tell a different story of what you are growing so that you can capture even more value, even just on top of what you didn't spend. So really appreciate that. Alan, do you have anything that comes to mind there as far as people who've been on a similar journey in your neck of the woods or that you're aware of?
Yeah, I can give you many examples, just like Gabe can. Let me give you a couple of quick ones. But one is Adam Grady and his family in North Carolina. Adam is 10th generation. Their farm's been in the family since 1780s. But they made their transition. And actually, Adam and his father were very skeptical at first. And they began implementing some regenerative practices simply to prove it wrong. And the problem was that it worked. And so after it worked, they began to implement it, on a much, much larger scale on their farm. By year 2, and it's a 1,200 acre farm, by year 2, they had saved $200,000 in input cost. And at the end of year 2, Adam was able to pay off his bank notes. And now they have expanded into a host of other enterprises. And Adam has been a host of multiple soil health academies and many other regenerative workshops, and is a huge advocate. So a person that started out as a pretty big skeptic is now one of the biggest advocates. And then another one, if we go all the way out to California, Daniel Unruh, who is a walnut producer out there in the Central Valley, he was pretty conventional, attended a soil health academy, and made significant changes in what he was doing. And he went from quite a few struggles, including root-eating nematode struggles in his walnut orchard, to now having thriving trees and nut crops. He's added, sheep to the equation, grazing in there. He has had significant reductions in reliance on irrigation, which is critically important in the significantly reduced reliance on any kind of synthetic fertilizers on his sides. And we have done analysis on his nut crops, and they are far healthier than they were prior.
Yeah, no, I think that's going to continue to become more and more important. Is that this? I think that there's a lot of people that are awakening to the problems in our food system and starting to pay attention to what is the food actually that I'm putting in my body. What kind of nutrient density does it have? And so I think that the soil health is the key to growing those healthier, more nutrient-dense foods that can meet that rising demand.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. And if you're aware, we've been heavily involved in a lot of highly detailed phytonutrient research with Dr. Stefan Van Vliet and his team. And, the results that we are finding there are pretty revealing and quite staggering. And it's very that with this, what we are finding is that the more biologically active the soil is, and the more diversity that we are introducing out there, the greater the phytonutrient richness in the end result foods that we consume. And these phytonutrients are very powerful antioxidants and anti-inflammatories. And every disease, disorder, and malady known to man starts with inflammation. So if we can eat foods that are rich in anti-inflammatories and antioxidants, we circumvent issues. So this is important.
You know, a long time ago in this episode, we mentioned record high beef prices, tanking commodity grain prices. But to me, it seems to present an opportunity to the beef producer. These record high beef prices are presenting us with an opportunity to make some changes. Could you talk a little bit about what you think we should be doing with these opportunities right now, as beef prices are as high as they are?
Sure, I'll start and then ask Gabe to chime in too. We're both also beef producers ourselves. And yes, while you're partaking of and benefiting from these record high prices, we ought to be reinvesting a good portion of that money into transitioning our farms and ranches into regenerative approaches. Now is the time to be doing that, because just like the record high grain prices have now fallen and are continuing to fall, it's going to happen again with beef prices. They're not going to remain high forever. They never have. We've always had a decline once we have an uptick. And so prepare now while you have the means to make that preparation. Make the mistakes now that you need to make while you have that buffer in revenue coming in. Gabe?
Absolutely. And I would say any good, sound businessman or woman would realize that when you have these high beef prices like we're seeing right now is not the time to expand your herd. If anything, they should be taking advantage and cashing in and then using some of those dollars. First of all, retire debt if you have debt. That's number one, because just look at where interest rates are at. And we all know that now they're talking no decline in interest rates, probably until at least 2025, Q1 of 2025. So why not retire that debt first? Or, as Alan said, make those improvements, whether it be water infrastructure, exterior fences. Obviously, we like to keep as many of the interior fences temporary as possible so that you can be more adaptive. But I would look at also the opportunity to cash in. Ellen and I talked about this with the large number of clients that we have. A full 90+% of them who have beef animals are overstocked. Okay, why not cash in on these high prices, liquidate part of the herd, allow your system to recover and get your stocking rates where they should be? But you want to jumpstart your regenerative journey, just defer some of those paddocks for whatever length of time is appropriate for your context. So that's what I'd do with these high prices.
And Gabe, one other thing in that regard is, since we've got these high prices, now is also the time to begin to wean your livestock off of these crutches, all of these inputs, and do some really good epigenetic selection. So cull harder, begin to wean yourself down to reveal those animals that can't make it, and to also reveal those that can, and cull those that can't while you've got the opportunity.
That's a good point, Alan. So just last night I was on a podcast and there was people from all over North America, and we were talking about bale grazing quite a bit. And one producer in Canada was talking about the fact that they'll only have fed hay about 6 weeks, this winter up in Canada. And yet there was a producer from the southeastern U.S. on who appeared happy because they're only feeding hay for about 3 months this year, this winter. And I'm just laughing to myself, what's wrong here? What's wrong? Right? But Alan talked about epigenetics. He's absolutely right. I don't think the majority of producers, no matter where they're at, realize that animals can graze year round, and we really don't need to be supplementing them as much as we think we do.
Yeah, and it's a great time to find the ones that can't and get them out of the herd so that you can keep the ones that can, and it's going to provide a handsome return, even getting rid of some of those that can't work in that system without all the crutches. So, great opportunity to take advantage of that. And I think that, again, we've got an opportunity here to make these changes, and people should be looking at it. I think that a lot of what we've talked about today has been around this idea of changing minds, changing education. We're talking to people who I think by and large probably have adopted a lot of these strategies, but maybe they've got neighbors who are looking for different ways of doing things, or they're concerned about their neighbors and wanting to help them make a change. What have been some of the ways or some effective strategies for presenting this information in a way that it is received? And I think it's going to be different for every neighbor, right? The one neighbor is going to need more of the 2x4, strategy, while another neighbor is going to need a different strategy. So can you guys share with me some ways of communicating that have been successful in your experience?
Well, honestly, Clay, the most effective ways are visual, and on their own farm, their own ranch. So getting out there on their property and digging in their soils, doing the shovel test in their soils, because you can't deny what you're seeing in front of your own eyes on your own place, right? So digging in their soils and showing them the comparisons and contrasts based on, how we know and they know they've been managing. Sticking an infiltration ring in the ground and looking at their soil's ability to infiltrate water or not. How well are they performing in that regard? We're taking a thermometer out and doing soil temperature. That really makes an impact. A lot of people have never understood just how hot soils that are exposed can get, 140, 150, 160 degrees. And then finally, another thing that really works, particularly with grazers, is plant Brix levels. Just taking a refractometer out and showing them that. So it's the visual things that you can quickly show them on their own farms, on their own ranches, that are the things that most resonate with them and that make the biggest difference.
I would certainly agree with what Alan said. I would just add to that you have to be a good listener, and you have to take people in their context where they're at. And, there's an old saying that goes, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. It doesn't do us any good to try and force things on. Clay, you mentioned earlier about government policy. I had this conversation just with a person yesterday who wanted to know what they could do to influence government policy to mandate regenerative agriculture. And I told them, I hope it does not come to that, because anytime we try and force ourselves on others, that's not going to have good results.
Yep. Totally agree with that. I think that one of the good things that I picked up today as we were talking is, take them to the fence row, where the management regime is having less of an impact, and show them the difference that it is there, especially on a crop field where you can't get all the way to that fence row and there's some grass growing there, and you can see the difference of infiltration and temperature and all these things, aggregation, all these things, is an opportunity to kind of show some of those things. So I really appreciated that for sure. We mentioned earlier this nutrient density issue, and there was a recent article about significantly lower nutrient density in our foods. What were some of the takeaways of that, and what were some of the suggested solutions in the article to resolve the lack of nutrient density in the food?
Yes. So that article has made the rounds now. It's pretty widespread, pretty widely read. Now, what is true in the article is that we have seen a precipitous decline in nutrient density in the vast majority of our foods. And so I would wholeheartedly agree with that, and the data clearly shows that. However, the solutions to that presented in the article were what I shake my head at. So they had two principal solutions. One was, well, let's do more gene editing. Let's genetically create plants that have more nutrient density. Well, I'm a geneticist, Clay, and that's what I did when I was at the university. And I'm sorry, you can gene edit all you want, but you can't force a square peg into a round hole, okay? And you can only gene edit for very specific nutrients, not for the whole spectrum of phytonutrients. The second solution that they recommended was biofortification. So much like enriched flour, right, with vitamins added to our flour, hey, let's add more XYZ minerals to our fertilizers, and let's just put it in through our fertilizers. Well, now, wait a minute. I thought most farmers were already fertilizing their crops. Okay. So now we're saying they got to add even more minerals to their fertilizers for their crops so that the crops will then have it in it. None of the solutions, and the researchers themselves never measured or mentioned the power of soil biology and the power of that biology in nature to put phytonutrient richness into these products. Never mentioned in there at all. That is the way we need to be doing it. That's the real solution. So all they were proposing was putting a Band-Aid on a gushing wound, addressing the symptoms and not the root cause. Now, granted, addressing the symptoms creates opportunity for major agribusiness corporations to make even more billions of dollars by selling farmers more traded seed and by selling farmers more fertilizer. Okay? So that's a solution not for the farmer and not to the benefit of the farmer. It's going to cost the farmer even more. That's a solution for major agribusiness corporations.
One of my favorite ways of describing that kind of nutrient addition is spray tan. We've spray tanned on the nutrients.
Yeah.
Rather than actually having the nutrients integral to the actual product itself. So I think that's a helpful way of thinking about it.
Clay, if I may, I kind of have a thought to sum that up. Many in the audience know Wendell Berry, a farmer, an author, a philosopher, and he made the statement that the act of eating is an agricultural act. But those of us involved in farming and ranching, we all know we're part of something much greater than ourselves, and that's God's creation. So I would contend that the act of eating is a spiritual act. And I think that's we need to keep that in mind.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't think that there's no way to incentivize people into this. It takes that mindset shift. I think that the biggest, the one that comes to my mind is the fact that diversity appears in all of the 6, the 3, and the 4, right? It's in the 6 principles of soil health. It's in the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. It's in the 4 ecosystem processes. Diversity is everywhere, and I think that becomes a big part of how we make this nutrient density shift in what we are producing. We will achieve greater levels of nutrient density as the diversity increases. Is that reflect with what you guys have been seeing? As you mentioned, studies with Stefan Van Vliet and others, is that reflected in what you've been seeing empirically?
Absolutely. And so just like Gabe got to the bottom line really is, are we good stewards or not? And good stewardship does place that phytonutrient richness into our foods. And Gabe said it correctly. Eating is a spiritual act. And I would say, do we believe God's promises or not? Plain and simple. Do we really believe his promises? He has told us very clearly that if we are good stewards, there will be abundance, there will be health. Do we believe that or not?
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate it. Appreciate both of you guys. I think as we point towards wrapping up here, I'd like to just give you the opportunity to talk about the importance of continuing to educate yourself. I think this, as I've learned, the more I learn about this, the more it becomes clear to me that soil health is a continuum. There is no, at least not that we've found yet, I don't think there is an upper limit of how good and healthy this system can become. And where most of us are starting from incredibly degraded resources, the potential for growth is almost, seems to be, to me, limitless. And so we have to continue to seek out more and more education to continue to sharpen that management axe so that we can continue to see the compounding and cascading effects play out. So talk to me a little bit about how you guys personally think about continuing education and the importance of everybody really committing to that lifelong learning.
Yeah, those are great points, Clay. And, I often sum it up by saying, the more I know I don't know. And one of the most exciting things to me about regenerative agriculture is that I learn something new every day. And that makes it fun again. I can't tell you how many people, farmers, ranchers, have come to me and said, man, this is fun. It's enjoyable. It's exciting again. I love getting up every morning and doing this. And I think it just adds so much to a person's mental well-being, as well as your potential profitability if you become a lifelong learner.
I think it takes you from that the serial killer mentality, right? Herbicide, fungicide, insecticide. They all end with the same CIDE, right? It takes you from going out to figure out how are you going to kill all these things so you can grow what you want to grow, to saying, let's let the land express itself and partner with nature, as you said, work in synchrony with nature, work in synchrony with God's design. And that mindset shift totally revolutionizes our relationship to the resources that have been entrusted to us.
Absolutely.
Your thoughts on lifelong learning?
It's absolutely essential. And life is awful boring if you're not learning and discovering. I agree with Gabe. That's what makes regenerative agriculture so exciting, is that there really are those new aha moments practically every single day. And that's what gives you hope. That's what encourages you. And that's what builds confidence.
And I think that a lot of times those aha moments come from the perspective of someone else who's been looking at it from a different angle than you have. And I think that that's the importance of having those networks and those communities and being in those rooms of workshops where somebody else can just say it a little different way that actually connects with you and helps you to implement some of those things.
Absolutely.
Any thoughts as we point towards wrapping up here? Anything we missed today or something else you wanted to cover?
I think you covered it.
Well, Gabe, Alan, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great being with you, Clay.
As always, very good stuff there with Gabe and Alan. I appreciate their perspective. I appreciate the wealth of knowledge that they have regarding how do you help people make that transition. And so, as always, encourage you to check out their website. Links in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/361. Also would really like to be at the Understanding Ag, the Soil Health Academy school that will be happening near Pierre, South Dakota in July. It's a very busy time for us at the church where we host 3 camps for varying ages, and they start that week of that one. So I'm not sure if I'll be able to make it through the whole course or not, but it'll be on the Turner Ranch. Pretty interesting opportunity there. So we'll see if that works out. Coming up next week on the Working Cows podcast, an opportunity to talk to Elaine Fraze about how do we train the next generation of ranch managers to be ready to step into that role? How do we prepare them to be leaders of multi-million-dollar businesses in most cases. And so how do we prepare them for that responsibility and for the ability to make good decisions and some of those things? So I'm going to talk to Elaine about that coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.